So we're having an official debate. We have Aveitt, we have John Lyon. Aveitt's taking the position that the Earth is spherical. John Lyon's taking the agnostic position. As always, when we base upon who concedes, if we don't get a vocal concession from each participant, then we'll put it to a voting poll in which you, the audience, can vote on who you think performed better overall in the debate. No time limit, no moderation. You guys can get started.
Yeah, so I'd like to start by just explaining my position, if that's okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say, go ahead and feel free to talk about your position to start. That sounds fair.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say my position is probably a really rare one, or not very common, especially in modern society. Um, and without getting too in depth as to why I think that is, I don't necessarily think, although my position is a not a common one. I don't think there's any negativity or anything incorrect with having. And the reason behind that is that I recognize that in reality, at least in regards to being a human being, living as a human being and interacting with other human beings, you have certain requirements, you have certain limitations, and there are certain results when interacting with each other. Um, just to summarize what I'm talking about, how this is reflected in modern society is, you're born into a reality where there's already kind of a social understanding in place. The people that birthed you will typically, they'll either put you through the same institutions, or they'll apply the same conditionings or initial indoctrinations that they received directly to you, because that's what they've accepted to be the norm. So from birth, I would say that the typical situation from birth in modern culture is that you're born in a society with specific understandings, or I call them social truths, where it's not things that are easily verifiable right off the bat or right off the hand, but they're kind of socially accepted, or socially understood, like things like this happened way back in the day, that happened way back in the day, or things like we've gone into space, or we landed on the moon, like you know some of those things are hard for the average person to verify, but are considered kind of, for the most parts, social truths, or understood to be true things that exist. So that's presented to you, at least in modern times now. That's presented to you, from birth, without your you know your choice in the matter. And how it comes
I
down. Go ahead.
i- if I can just say real fast, up until you mentioned Earth, I feel like everything you're saying is like very, very understandable, and I agree 200%. Like I really do feel like we are born into like a society that pushes its norms on us, and I think like there's definitely a good degree of healthy skepticism to be had. I mean, like people not thinking deeper on these social norms that we just have is why the world's in such terrible shape. I mean, if people were to stand up like against, I don't know, we could say agriculture, we could say American industrialism, we could say big oil, all of these things that are super important keeping society the running the way it is, that benefits a very small portion of very, very wealthy elite people. People don't consider these things. Has a lot to do with a lot of the negatives in the world. So I'm very sympathetic with this worldview.
Yeah, so just from the basic summarization, it's just a worldview that some pieces of information can be hard to verify, and they can be pushed onto you from birth just because of how they're perpetuated in the social norm. Not to say that the majority of that is lies, or there's like a big conspiracy or anything against you, but just to say that that is a kind of a process that occurs. Information is presented to you from birth without your participation, and there's kind of a lens applied to it as it's explained to you, whereas you don't come to your own conclusion. So where that actually plays a role in my position is that in reality, you have to do specific things in order to perpetuate a comfortable existence. So I didn't pursue any higher education in terms of like you know physics or space, rocket science, or like traveling through space or being an astronaut. I didn't really pursue those disciplines. So when information related to those topics is presented to me, I have to do a fact check, and I have to break it down. And even then, it's still hard for me to understand what's being specifically presented to me. Um, and so the reason why I think it's fair for me to remain agnostic is because I can recognize malicious intent behind misinformation. I can recognize my inability to verify the information presented to me, as well as I can recognize that it's not necessary for my existence, or for even the perpetuation of my comfortability, to accept the narrative presented to me. And it comes to the point, while we can talk about it a little bit, but even though science, while it's not comparable to religion in the sense that you could argue it has more verifiable facts, for me to believe narratives that have to do with science without being able to understand those facts, or being able to um, you know replicate tests or things like of that nature to reach similar results or anything, without me to really apply the science or understand the science. For me to accept what's presented to me from the science feels similar to presenting what's presented to me in religion, something I can't verify, or not that I necessarily can't. I just, I either lack the understanding or the tools in order to verify. So it requires faith in order for me to accept it as truth. And the reason why I think it's okay to accept or be agnostic as to whether we've traveled through space or landed on the moon, or that's even a real thing, or we know what the Earth's shape is from out of space or whatever. It makes me feel like I would be doing it on faith to accept that as to be true, because I can't um you know
Well,
go ahead.
is your agnosticism brought about your distrust for the government and the narrative, or is it more brought about because you haven't taken the time to look into it?
Well, while I'll grant that if I were to maybe be like a rocketeer, or study physics in a college for many years, or understand like rocket engineering, or things like that, I'll grant that if I were to delve into those fields to a much larger extent, maybe to the extent of an actual professional astronaut or someone who works on rocket engines or whatever, perhaps I'd be less agnostic. I don't want to make that claim because I can't know, but I think it may be fair to say I'd be less agnostic. But also, the things that have been presented to me, um, I would not consider proof beyond a reasonable doubt, based on the understanding I have of modern technology. And the reason I say that is because the things that are presented to me as proof, um, besides the science that's explained to me, beyond my understanding, I get, what do I get? Like video footage, the launch zones, from a distance, wherever they have the launches or whatever. But the actual like construction of the devices, how they actually function, is the facility open or closed to tours and things like that. Like, you know, I don't have access to everything that I would say I need for what they present to me to be proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, if I just look at basic things like, and I don't even have to say there's this like big conspiracy, like, you know, they're trying to hide the real shape of the planet. Like I could break it down to something super logical, like the oil companies taking up all the battery patents because they don't want people to develop electric cars and run gas cars out of business. The same way people developing space technology would want to keep it minimal and keep it secret, and put you through a lot of steps for you in order to do it for yourself. So it's either they control the market on it, or it's less commercializable, or whatever. I mean, I could break it down to something simple like that. Not even to say that that is what it is or it's as limited as that, because I could go even extreme. Like I could say something simple like that, or I could say something completely extreme, like sentient life has existed for millions of years, and our human history has only been recorded for maybe a few thousand. And at some point in our developmental history, a sentient species, within this, structure or model of space that's been presented to us, used similar or more advanced space flight technology, came to our planet for the sake of, like, doing medical experiments or, time space physics experiments on sentient life. So they created our race and created, like, a scenario where we wouldn't be aware of how we're rats in a maze. And then for a few thousand years, they've just been studying us and doing tests and making deals with, the people that we consider to be officials, so that we continuously accept a narrative that other humans present to us, whereas the whole situation is just we're ants in a biome or something like that. It could be like to that extreme. So I present the basic one where it's just like economic reasons or controlling the market, and then it could go to extremes like the whole structure of reality breaks down.
Yeah. I mean, I as far as your economic arguments, I'm not sure if I understand the economic impact of the shape of the Earth. If you want to give that a second shot, I'd love to hear the argument, the second argument you made. While I probably have an argument with the premises, I guess could be valid, right? There's kind of like an issue because in the second experiment, I feel like there would have to be people working with the aliens, right?
Right, well, that would be like the rich 1%. That's what I could say.
Yeah, but what we know is that people don't keep secrets. Um,
Well, we have secret societies.
I I don't think we do, John.
The Vatican has a whole bunch of documents in a library in the bottom that only people associated with the Vatican can look at. That's not a secret. What about CIA documents that have to be
Um,
declassified before you can look at them? That's a secret.
well, the thing with CIA documents is we often find out what happens after a couple years. That would actually be evidence in my favor. Is that like things stay secret for a while, but after like a certain amount of time, we find out that like, oh yeah, the people that committed the 9/11 attacks had Saudi Arabia funding, so the Americans were trying to like uh, hush a lot of things under the rug, and that's why it looks like there's so much smoke there. The fire is that it was funded by Saudi Arabia. The smoke that everyone's seeing, and they're saying, "Oh, something's going on here. Bush did 9/11." As much as I don't like Bush, I don't think that's the case.
Well,
Uh,
that argument just sound indicates to me that they keep secrets until they understand what the narrative is, and then they don't keep secrets anymore. But that still indicates that they keep secrets at some point.
yeah, they keep secrets at some point, but at some point the truth comes out.
So what if, been doing the space race since the 60s. What if we're just keeping the secret for another 50 years that we don't actually know?
See, we don't keep secrets that long. I have really bad news. I was trying to find this study. I found a couple articles referencing this study, and I'm absolutely killed that I couldn't get the real firsthand information. But there's a widely known study by Dr. David Robert Grimes. His study is published by an online journal, PLOS1. Essentially, he says, "Hey, look, we know that people keep secrets for a certain amount of time," and he breaks out a calculation. In his calculation, he says that something like the moon landing, because there were roughly um, 411,000 people involved, that someone would have spilled the beans no matter how much they were paid within under 4 years. He says 3 years and 8 months.
That's interesting to me though, because like, when did Hollywood get established? In like the early 1900s,
Oh yeah,
and
somewhere around
like,
there.
and apparently, like, allegedly all the way back to the times of like Shirley Temple, there's been like pedophilia present in Hollywood, in the Hollywood industry, in the entertainment industry. but we're kind of just now talking about it in the 2010s, 2020s. So
I think
that's several decades.
Well, I think this is a really good point of what like strength can do and social progressivism can do. Um, because you're right, and we've known about this for a long time. See, like that's a big secret. They don't want us to know. They being the wealthy elites. They don't want us to know that they're pedophiles. But we've known for a long time. Just society itself didn't give a shit. Society itself was like, well, that Hollywood actress, she got a job, right? I don't get paid that much. Stuff like that, and people try to justify it.
I don't know. I think maybe it was known within the circles of Hollywood and joked about to the point where like there was a, you know, like a joke surrounding it, but I don't think it was actually accepted to be a reality until people started coming out and discussing it, like the whole Me Too movement and whatnot.
I People have known about Epstein for a long time. He wasn't like
I
just
wouldn't say
discovered
like
recently.
I wouldn't say like the average Joe or the public eye knew about him the way they do now after there's been news coverage about him.
Oh, yeah, I think that's probably the beauty of the internet and just people being more socially progressive. I hate to say like, oh, so ever many people above a certain age are Republicans, and Republicans always go with like they kind of fall towards whoever has like the money and the power because they that hierarchy is good and the people who are in their positions deserve to be in those positions, so they kind of reflexively defend them. Um, I think I don't know. There's a lot of old people who I would just say the younger generations are just more progressive. And when our generation found out, hey, you guys are raping people, this is pretty fucked up. Power of Twitter gave us a platform that wasn't available to us beforehand.
But that's interesting that you bring that up then. See, that indicates to me that the reason why we're getting more and more skepticism these days is because we have access to information in a way that we didn't before. And so to me, that indicates that it was more common to accept the narrative about something that you couldn't understand or replicate on your own. But now, using research with access to information like the internet, you can not only do research on the topics from an educational stance, but you can also do research on other people's participation, things people upload or people discuss. So there's a much larger base of information, and that's why we're getting so much, varying information and skepticism, even to this point. And like, I personally think that's why, because if I argue that the launches to the moon, the Apollo missions, the footage presented wasn't actually, shot in space or it was edited or something like that. If I argue that, I could argue that the only real information people had was people that were involved in the project had information or people had the broadcast that they were given. But nowadays, people can discuss both sides of the information because they can share it regardless of their distance. So if I participate in a project and I whistleblow on it, regardless of where you are, if you have access to where I put it on the internet, you can learn about it. And that's the difference between now and then is someone who could whistleblow about that project could never really tell you what they send you a mail, like a letter in the mail if they know your address. No,
Right.
but nowadays they could just post what they know, and then it could either be, received negatively and someone bashes it, or it could be received positively and someone, analyzes it, try to understand it, replicate it, whatever. And now we have all this varying information. And what's interesting is that you would think that how much we've progressed as a species, and this is one of the reasons I think it's laughable, but you would think like anyone that's skeptic about the shape of the earth or about flying through space or have we done it or are we doing it, you would think if they're skeptic about it that that's ridiculous, but in actuality it's more likely in this time period that they would be skeptic about it than any previous time period where it was easier to just accept what was presented to you because you had no other option.
Yeah, I went into this debate saying that I understand your position. I understand skepticism. I'm skeptical of absolutely everything the government says.
So I
And I
think
think one ought to be. So I'm not saying that
then I guess what that boils down to is
skepticism
what
is
what
bad.
what
I'm
would we
saying you're wrong and the earth is round.
Right. So I guess that would boil down to then what facts do we have of that and how definitive are they?
Um, I mean, there's a fantastic philosopher from about 2,000 years ago who measured the shape of the Earth using math that I'd really like to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. I actually think using mathematics to determine the shape of the Earth in general is an interesting topic. I
Yeah, yeah.
actually go ahead.
When I found out about it, I was really really interested. I thought it was super cool.
Yeah, because I've been doing a lot of research on this topic. Mostly, I've just been listening to people who, knowledge claim versus other people who knowledge claim. It's typically people who knowledge claim, that the Earth is this specific shape because of what NASA and SpaceX present. And then it's people who say, it's a conspiracy and the Earth is actually this shape and it's like a flat Earth or a hollow Earth or whatever. I'm different in the sense that I recognize why they're skeptical of what the round earthers are presenting to them, but I don't see how they're coming to the conclusion as to what they think the shape of the earth is. It's the
I
same. It's the same thing for me. Neither person is presenting me with definitive proof. That's what I feel like. So if we can discuss round Earth proof, starting with math or going into actual space footage or whatever you want to do, I'm down to explore all topics.
I figured that I didn't want to talk about actual footage of it because that kind of gets us into a prove your source game. I didn't want to run into a situation where I'm like, "Hey, look, they flew to the moon," and then you're like, "Aveitt, that's CGI. It could be CGI. Look at how great CGI is," and then you show like how good like the new Avengers movie looked, and then like
That's
we're in like
fair.
this ultimate stalemate that like I guess I just have to say
You
this
know,
is state funded and we can see where like the taxpayers' money is going. Um, but I just figured it was a waste of time.
it's interesting that you say that. Like, I think I agree with you on this fact that we could get into crazy circular arguments if we're just talking about the footage itself. But I feel like a good method to disproving or actually approaching that would be you approaching the actual technology of the cameras and how they differ from like a high production studio camera or like a camera meant to film green screens or whatnot so you can do CGI, as well as looking at the budgets of both industries. In terms of budget, these movies that these CG movies, they use like $100 million budgets or whatever, and they create these incredible visuals, things that they can make people look younger, they can make people look older, they can add creatures that aren't even real, they can create scenery or put cities, like they can do basically like anything, whether it's television or movie, if they have enough of a budget. And I look at the budget of like SpaceX or NASA, not necessarily where they're getting. That's actually interesting, cool dog. The CGI aspect for the old footage. I'll touch on that after I'm done with this. But yeah, I just think about the budgets they have and what they're capable of with those budgets. Now, I'm not going to make a knowledge claim and say I know what they're using the budgets on, and nor will I say does it matter where the budgets are coming from. If I was going to make the claim that they're doing it for an economic reason, I could focus on where the budgets are coming from. But I'm essentially saying what they can do with that money. And now, while they can develop different technologies with the money, I don't know how necessary it is to have billions of dollars a year to develop technology for one, two, maybe three, four rocket launches per year. And at the same time, with a budget like that, you could create the most intricate CG visuals, um, topping even some of the highest budgets. And in terms of the footage from the '60s, I went into a whole bunch of research as to the film, like the set they supposedly used, and like the different techniques they supposedly used, and like how Stanley Kubrick might have been involved, and that's why he used like Apollo references to it in his Shining movie. But that stuff was really speculation, and I didn't really want to present it in the
I know
debates.
John Oliver. If we're gonna talk about the moon landing for just a minute, John Oliver did a fantastic segment on the moon landing, essentially getting down to the lighting that we saw on the moon landing. The way the light hits at like perfect angles, the way it's shown. Because the light isn't like normally if you imagine a flashlight, right? If you cast a flashlight at an object, the light will bounce past the object because it's close. Uh, I hope that makes sense, right? So you would imagine it would be like perfectly black behind you, but it's not. There's kind of like a second shadow, and that's like where the light's curving around you. Um,
That's
so
interesting. How does he
that
know the light conditions in an atmosphere he's not in? Like the moon has a different atmosphere than the Earth, so how
yeah,
light refracts would be different.
well, that's I mean, if you go outside, your shadow, if you stand in the sun and there's not a second light source, the sun, because it's so far away and it's so bright, it hits you, and there's no like, um, it doesn't do that as it would like an artificial light that's closer.
Are you
Uh,
are you saying it wouldn't do that on Earth or on the moon?
on the Earth and the moon.
Well, the
But
conditions are different.
the moon is more specific. I was gonna say the Earth is different because the atmosphere and it's like a little fuzzy on the sides, and I was like hoping we wouldn't get into like, oh, if you look at the shadow, there's like a little bit of a fuzz, and I was like, yeah, that's because the light gets dispersed in the atmosphere. You're totally right. It's not perfectly flat, but in the moon landing photos, the sun hits like perfectly on a degree. There's no light curving when it hits an object. And the only way you can replicate that lighting is with lasers if you were to replicate it. And they didn't
Okay,
have technology to make lasers in the 60s.
I see
Or
what
if
you're
they did,
saying.
it was just ridiculously expensive. I don't want to completely mischaracterize what John Oliver said. I would just appeal to the audience. Hey guys, watch it. It's fantastic if you want to know more about the movie.
Interesting. So you're basically saying that he presented the idea that based on the lighting in the footage, they could not replicate the conditions with the current technology of the time. That's what you're saying?
Well, if they could have, it would have been more expensive than the budget that was presented. I remember the punchline being that it would have been cheaper to go to them. So I think they could have, but I don't think it was feasible.
Interesting. Okay, that makes all right. So that makes me think like, okay, so if we're not gonna agree, on the footage or whatever. Although I think it's very interesting that he was just basically saying they would need a bigger budget and not that the technology was impossible. But why have we not gone back, or why have we not further developed our moon travel? Like, why don't we have a base on the moon at this point?
Uh, as far as I'm aware, it's because there's nothing like financially motivating us to do so. We have a space station, and space station's super, super interesting because we get to study zero gravity, but studying light gravity is not as interesting. You get the same effects in zero gravity, and you can tell what's going on sooner. Um, and I don't think the moon's made out of anything special. If someone in chat wants to correct me that the moon's made out of something special, sure. But like, as far as I'm aware, there's nothing up there that's financially interesting for
Well,
us to
I
look
I
at.
see massive financial incentives from the same fact that why would it be financially incentivizing to construct, from completely from scratch and maintain the orbit of an object, that we can do zero gravity tests and okay, that's fine. Versus a place that we already know we can go to because we supposedly traveled to it before, can set up observational or telescopic or radio frequency devices on it to further observe deep into space or to further reach, to contact anyone or anything.
Well, we
Deep
get the
space observation.
deep space observation is also something we get at the space station. Not to mention, we shoot out satellites. And they take measurements. Remember a couple years ago there was that beautiful photo of Pluto with like the heart on it? Because our satellite flew past it and now it's just flying into the abyss and we'll never get to use it again.
Uh, you're saying what? A satellite got out
Yeah,
of
yeah,
orbit or something?
we shoot satellites into space and we have them take photos for us. Um, But most of the telescopes we use aren't ocular. Most of them use radio waves, or um, they take a look at background radiation, radio background radiation. Yeah, they take a look at that, and that's kind of the reason why they do it.
Sorry, I'm just reading the chat and seeing why other people are, because this is just a learning experience for everybody. So I wanted to see what other people were presenting as to why, uh, these things are possible or impossible or whatever. It just I understand, like, if we could make a space station, we would want to, but I just don't understand why we would rush so hard to get to the moon and then pretend like there's nothing special about it and never go back.
Oh, it's
And
because
then
America
say,
lost the space race. Okay, yeah, I'd love to answer that. Because the USSR beat us to space.
I mean,
And
supposedly what they got Sputnik in space, right? Or
yeah,
Soyuz? Which one?
I think Sputnik was America. I don't remember the name of the Russian guy. I just remember his quote.
Whichever one was the first. Okay, yeah. So that was the first. The satellite Sputnik was the first one, first object that they sent into space. So if you're saying that they won the space race simply because they did that, I would argue that putting a man on the moon wins you the space race, and that's what we supposedly did, or at least that's what we presented to the world that we did.
Exactly. That's the American narrative. Is that America won the space race? We got to the moon first. The Soviets said, "What do you want to do in the moon? It's just a big rock." And I would say, in this regard, the Soviets were right, because nobody's gone back since, because there's no reason to. It's just a big rock. We already live on a big rock. Um, yeah, it was Yuri Gagarin. Totally butchered that name. But he was the first person to go into space on April 12th, 19. And the goal was not to go to the moon for the space race. The reason why the space race happened, right, is because each superpower was flexing how big their missiles were and how far away they could nuke you from. And if you could get something into space, you could have it land anywhere you want, and that's like the ultimate flex. That's saying, as long as I exist, nobody's safe on the planet. And that was the goal of the space race.
Why wouldn't be the next step of that having like a moon base or a moon launch pad?
Well, because there's no threat there. I can't threaten you if I have a guy on the moon, but I can threaten you just by getting something to space and telling you I can bomb you wherever I want, whenever I want.
But that's what I'm saying. Is like, if you could launch weapons from space, right? Wouldn't you want to do that? And
They don't
wouldn't
have to
you?
land. I'm saying, yeah, you can. That's the purpose of the space race. You just launch a rocket up, and then it's like orbiting Earth like a satellite.
But no, see,
And then,
if you're launching rockets from Earth, you have to have a locatable launch site that other people from Earth can get to. And at the same time, wouldn't it be easier to detect a launch that occurs initially? Not only could you destroy the launch site, but you could also detect the launch as soon as it occurs if it's happening on the same planet as you. But if it's coming from like the dark side of the moon, you wouldn't really know till it's entering the atmosphere, wouldn't you?
um, this is a fantastic question about nuclear deterrence, John. I'm gonna say that if we could fuck with each other's nuclear launch sites, we absolutely would have. That just would have made it a hot war. So the thing is when you launch a missile, you can tell the trajectory by using like sonar and shit, as I'm pretty sure how they do it, right? So if the trajectory is flying towards your country, you know when to respond. But if the missile goes straight up, then You don't know when to respond. You don't know what exactly to do. There's hesitation there. Definitely not enough of a reason to end life on the planet, because that would be the response is like, oh, they shot a missile up, we nuke them. Right? Is you utterly destroy them, and then according to like nuclear deterrence theory, they would like nuke you back, and then the whole world ends. Um, the requirement to make that decision to end all life isn't justified if the missile goes straight up, but it is justified if it flies towards you. Maybe.
And also another thing I'm interested about is, well, first of all, yeah, if they're saying like, I don't understand why we would go to the moon in the '60s because it's just a rock in space. Like, how are they able to measure that specifically? Like, I know we have different technologies, like we can hit the moon with frequencies to like see if it's hollow or dense or whatever. But like, how do they know the materials of the object in space until they you know go and observe that the materials are present there? They can do mathematical predictions, maybe, no, right? But
Yeah, they can do some sort of math predictions. I think it has something to do with like the way light reflects off of stuff in space. Like every object uh has some sort of response when you bounce light off of it, and if you observe it well enough with the right tools, you can take a look at like how the light bounces or something. I'm unsure. That's some really high level chemistry stuff that I couldn't even pretend to understand.
and that's another thing is I don't understand is like the properties of the moon are very unique. It doesn't act the way that other moons do in our solar system. Um, it rotates instead of orbits the way that our Earth does. It rotates on its side, so we only see one face of it, which is also unique to our moon. As well as you can't determine the properties of it beyond the surface unless, I mean, at least with the technology that we had when we started the space race, I don't think you can determine the properties of it. So not only does it make sense uh, to
I mean,
go to the moon to study and understand what it is or how it affects the Earth from its perspective, but it doesn't make sense that we wouldn't do it with the budget that we have. It's not like we're giving these space programs or these space programs are earning all this money or whatever, but we're giving them the option either study how to get to Mars, study the ISS, or go back to the moon. You can't do all three. You can't. You can only do two of the three. Like there's no limit. Like they get so much money. Why wouldn't they task a somebody or like a group to go back to the moon, build a base on the moon, understand what's on the dark side of the moon? Like, do we even have satellite footage of the dark side of the moon or a narrative as to what it is? No, we don't. So why don't we go find out what that is?
yeah, I'm pretty sure we have photos of the dark side of the moon. I feel like this is gonna break down into us talking about if these photos are doctored or not, and that's not a discussion I'm really looking forward to
No,
have.
well, no, I don't. We don't have to get. I just want to see what it looks like.
Okay, cool.
This says an error occurred. What? Let me try again. But no, yeah, I just don't see like why we wouldn't go, and understand the moon. As well as like there's theories that the moon hit the Earth at some point, and that's why it's our moon. Like we would be able to find that out if we went and found like remnants of materials from Earth on the moon, right? Like when they come impact each other, we get moon rocks left on Earth and then Earth rocks left on the moon. Is that fair to? I also heard that too, Arco. But
I
that's just another thing. Like, wouldn't we want to study the moon, like on its surface, to figure out its relation to Earth? I wouldn't. It wouldn't make sense to me that we have hundreds of millions of dollars, multiple space agencies across multiple countries, and we just don't care about the moon. We don't go there. We don't have bases there. We don't study it intricately. Like,
Well, it was just like a political brownie point to say we didn't lose the space race, and then the Soviets didn't care check up. I think the only benefit to going to the moon, honestly, would be to throw the American flag on the floor, so that way America would spend millions of dollars to put the flag back. That would be like the biggest fuck you on the planet, and when someone does it, I'm here. That's just gonna be hilarious.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what's so odd to me is that they generate such a budget, but their projects are limited, and the information around those projects are limited too, unless you're well versed in the field. And at the same time, that doesn't give you all the information as to what they're doing with the science or how they're applying it with the budget they're given.
yeah, a lot of the budget I think might have to do with the education system. Let's talk about ancient math. Are you ready for this, John?
Yeah, let's have a discussion on math.
I like math. Math doesn't lie to you.
I get
Let me
confused
get a
about
piece of
that
paper.
because you have to round things sometimes. Like if you do math understanding that there's a margin of error, aren't you lying to yourself then?
Um,
Like take pi for example. It's
oh,
an
I get what you're
infinite
saying.
it's an infinite number. In order to calculate things with it, you have to pick a decimal point to stop at. So if you want to, the more what's the word? The more accurate your calculation, the more additional decimal numbers you would use or whatever. If you care less about the accuracy, you would just go 3.14. But still, you can't have an infinite calculation because the number's infinite. So you have to round in order to do calculations like that. So to me, that's kind of suspect as to being absolute proof. But we can talk about it.
Okay. Um, excellent. That's what we're gonna do. So, I, from the sounds of it, John, it doesn't seem like you're very big on the flat Earth side. So I'm not gonna bother making this comparison to flat Earth, but I would if you wanted me to. Okay.
I mean, yeah, it's no worries. In order to gain information on this topic, I had to listen to flat earthers and hollow earthers debate round earthers and stuff. So I'm fine with it.
Okay. Oh shoot. Ah man. Fuck. I thought I would be on my computer for this part of the discussion. Unfortunately, I'm not. Okay. Am I able to? Oh no, not that camera. Hup. Here we go. Nope. This time's the time.
Almost.
Almost. There we go. Excellent. So I drew something out for us, like a boomer. So this
All right.
is an example of a little science experiment that we could recreate with um, just traveling and having a phone call or trusting someone's numbers at noon. So essentially, what this is location A uh, is here, and it's noon for us, right? So the shadow is the sun's hitting it directly, and the shadow's very thin, right? It's almost 100%. And then a couple miles somewhere, you have a second location, and this is the same size stick stuck into the ground, and the sun is hitting the stick, and the shadow is cast at a steeper angle. Um, Now, this gets into some interesting situations, right? is we know that length right here is 100 miles. And then, I love how boomer. Oh, something that's really important I need to say for this experiment, by the way, is you have to make sure these are at a 90-degree angle. Little squares from geometry to prove the 90-degree angle thing, right? You have to make sure that's the case. Then you have location B, location A. And what you can do is using the sun as your measurement, right? You can say that the sun's hitting these two locations, giving us an angle. The angle is this way, and the angle is this way. I probably should have drawn them in separate directions, so that way it would make more sense. And using that, you can say there's a dotted line, and you can extrapolate that using math to get all the way to the center of the Earth. So now you have a triangle, right? You know that the distance of this is, as we said, 100 miles. Then you extrapolate, once you figure out the connection between these two, you know the angle, and then you times the angle to get to pi, and then you know the rough shape of the Earth. Was the science experiment that was done, and using this system, he was maybe somewhere between 1 to 16% off the actual measurement of the Earth using modern day technology.
Interesting. I would
And
love to
it's
see how a flat earther receives that math. Because I personally didn't have any issues with it. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Good drawing, good little diagram. I'm not skeptical of that, but I would love to see a flat earther's reaction to what you just did there mathematically.
yeah. Um, and I mean, this is using ancient science from 2,000 years ago. The heliocentric part that I originally mentioned, we've only known for a couple hundred years looking at the night sky, which I can talk about if you want to talk about knowing how we revolve around the sun just by looking at the sky a whole lot.
Well, I know we have ancient structures that we use to watch the position. We were very into astrology in our ancient cultures, and we had
Yeah,
whole sites and structures dedicated to observing the movement of the sun and the stars and stuff. And I would say a large portion of that knowledge is lost on modern in modern culture. So, um, yeah, I definitely can see. Hmm. When it comes to proving the actual shape of the Earth, I can definitely see that there are various methods. And the one that you applied could definitely be accurate. And I could definitely be willing to accept that the Earth is, a specific size and that it's a sphere and that the way that the solar system is expressed to us could potentially be real, like with the sun in the center, and we revolve around it with the force of gravity and electromagnetism and blah blah blah. I can accept that. I can't prove it, but I don't really necessarily have an issue with accepting it because it doesn't really, have any change. Like nothing in my immediate reality changes whether I accept that or not. What I have a harder time accepting is our ability to observe that or traverse that. Creating successful spacecraft that can, move through this model, as well as observe it from the outside. Because our only understanding of that is, either becoming well versed to the point of application, um, like being a rocket engineer or someone who understands how to construct these devices as well as how they work, um, as well as being an astronaut and being involved in one of these agencies and flying out and seeing watching myself lift from the ground and then leave the atmosphere, and then look back at the earth and be like, wow, I'm in space, I've done it, and then look and see like the sun and like the planets revolving around. I don't even know like what that experience would be like. I have no frame of reference to it.
Yeah. Um.
And I think maybe there's been only supposedly like 500 or 600 people in all of human history to claim to have participated in such an event out of the you know tens of billions of people that have existed throughout history on our planet. So it's like there's not really much that I can use to verify what's being presented to me unless I
They say,
dedicate my life to the science or participate in the agencies to that degree.
yeah. I mean, 2,000 years ago, they didn't have that kind of information. They knew the shape of the Earth
No, I mean it's fair. Like even if they discover the shape of the Earth, and
and the size of
they
the Earth.
right, and they actually happen to be right. We reiterate that narrative with our modern technology. Um, to me, that doesn't indicate anything about our freedom of movement or understanding through the structure. Like the narrative of them hiding the technology or its actual capabilities for a commercial purpose still exists for me, or the narrative of the extreme narrative of we're like insects in terms of how advanced we are as a species comparative to other sentient life in the universe, and this is just an experimental platform that all the way down to the mathematical structure of how our reality functions is an intricate design of like a much farther advanced sentience that wishes to do thought or physic experiments or whatever, and their results are better if we're unaware that it's an experiment. I still, even if we're able to mathematically discern the surface we're standing on, that doesn't really give me definitive understanding as to what the truth of that reality is, whether it's this technology is apparent and this is how we're using it, or it's the extent of this technology is hidden, and how we can actually apply it or how we actually are applying it is not something we share publicly, or you know we actually have, for generationally, our family for thousands of years has been dealing with these entities, and we enjoy a really rich and comfortable life because we continued the narrative that, we're a developing race and we're reaching for the stars, when in reality, we're just kind of doing what we're told, and this is all a thought experiment.
I don't think I can prove that reality is real. I
You
missed the
could,
debate earlier. I
I
wonder if
was,
they were able to prove it.
I was gonna say you could, you could easily present, science or,
I can
I was gonna say
I
you
can
could.
say,
Go ahead.
like, we have I I think this level of skepticism is a little confusing to me because we've already said, oh, sure, the math proves that the Earth is round, and we've known this for 2,000 years, and we know
Well,
how
it
big it
could.
is,
I
and we've known this
mean,
for 2,000 years. And
I
we've
don't. I don't
known,
have to disprove it, but I didn't apply the math to prove that. But I don't necessarily disagree with it based on what you presented to me. That's all I was saying. But I didn't
okay,
verify the math through application myself.
sure. It would be a super fun science experiment. I imagine that I'm not sure how the science experiment works with time zones. We would get a much more accurate representation of the size of the Earth. We did it in different time zones at noon. We could both put a yardstick down, and but I'm just unsure why we would say that. Sure, mathematically it proves it to be so. Why there would be skepticism past that? Like, because that's a really good connection that connects to the common narrative.
Wait, what do you mean? You mean that like the mathematical experiment?
Yeah, that the math experiment from 2000 years ago gave us the size of the Earth. We've known the size of the Earth for 2000 years. That's the narrative, is that the Earth is round. And now, all of a sudden, 2000 years later, you're taking like a step backwards, like way backward, where the ancient people were.
Well, it's not. No, it's not that, because like, I mean, even in the times of like the Catholic Church, like we had an accepted narrative that the Earth was flat. So you're saying we've
Well,
known for 2,000
if
years,
you're
but
if you're referencing Galileo, they knew the Earth was round. They thought that the Earth revolved around the sun, or that the sun revolved around the Earth. My bad.
what? No, we're
They thought it
right.
was
So
geocentric.
there's the model, but we didn't change away from the Earth being flat 2,000 years ago. It was more
Wait, yeah,
recent
we
than
did.
that. Let me
No,
double
it
check
wasn't.
this here.
Now, the sun being the center of the universe, that's a like kind of new contentious topic from like the last like 600 years or so. I do want to say while I'm talking about this, I
Oh,
want
I
to
no,
give
I
credit where
see.
credit is due. Uh, this is like a little footnote that I couldn't find more research on, but if anybody did, I would be super appreciative of it. In the Quran, they reference that the sun moves, and like uh, judging to that like explanation, or maybe they say that the earth swims. It's something like that. But in the 10th century, the Quran said that the earth revolves around the sun, and that there were some ancient Muslim scholars who knew that it did, but through like I think racist history, uh, that's just lost and I can't find it. But I just wanted to say that people were saying that.
I see what you're talking about the time period, about the transitioning of the flat to spherical, being it like the crux, like because it says 4th century BC is when Plato wrote about spherical Earth, and then Aristotle in 330 BC provided empirical evidence or whatever. But I guess I was talking about how it was like an accepted narrative by the common man, but I'm not seeing which time period that is.
Sure.
Because like if you ask an average person nowadays what's the shape of the earth, they're going to say it's round, even though they don't even know how to calculate that.
Yeah.
But like,
Education sucks.
but during this
It
time
needs to be better.
period, I definitely agree with that. But during this time period when they were when Aristotle was proving the earth to be a sphere, if you went up to the common man, you said, what's the shape of the earth? I don't think they would say a sphere, because Aristotle just proved it.
I have like some really weak conversations that I've had with teachers who have said that that's not the case, but that feels like a really flimsy ground to stand on. I I don't want to make a super weak argument like, well, in the 4th grade.
No, I mean it's tough. I think
Mrs. Schultz told me.
it's hard for me to. I guess it's because I'm referencing my own modern experiences with what, and if someone's discussing something like uh let me think of it, because proving the shape of the earth is a heavy concept. You can't just say this is the shape of the earth and here's why, and someone will go, ah, you're right, that makes sense. Like, you have to
I can
explain it and it
appeal.
has to be understood. So I'm
I
trying to
can
think of
appeal
like
to
where's the.
Vikings on this one, and say that Vikings said Jormungandr, the world serpent, wrapped itself around the earth. So I believe at least the Vikings are on my side on this one. I don't know how new the Vikings are. That might be
Oh,
like
which
against me
which
on this.
were the Vikings the ones that believed in Valhalla?
Yeah, I believe so.
Because they believed in a hollow Earth, I'm pretty sure. Because they talked about going to the North Pole, and you can go in and cross the bridge into the Emerald City of Valhalla or whatever. So I think they would believe it's a sphere because they believe there's like an inner Earth. And that's actually another interesting thing too, is because like you can prove, if you can mathematically prove that the Earth is a sphere, that's great. But does it prove the actual construction or physiology of the Earth? Like, does it disprove that it's a hollow Earth or anything like that, or does it just prove that the Earth is not flat?
Um, yeah. Well, originally our debate topic was on heliocentrism and the Earth's shape. I didn't look too much into the hollowness of it. All I have to say is something about volcanoes and magnets. If you
Oh,
could
that's
explain a volcano on a hollow Earth, sure, but like I don't. That like setup doesn't even make sense to me.
I mean, I guess I would, if I were to try to explain volcanoes on a hollow Earth, I would just say that the it's hollow in the sense that it's cored out, but the space in between the walls is dense enough that there could still be volcanic pressure and little volcanoes could grow. And maybe that would just indicate that there's volcanoes on the inside and outside of the membrane.
Like I'm just thinking like you believe in tectonic plates, right?
I understand what they are, and I guess I understand the science behind them. So yeah, you could say I believe that they're a thing. I've never.
Perfect.
It's
I
hard for me to
appreciate
make
it.
knowledge claims, so I'll just say I believe in them.
Okay, I appreciate it. I was gonna say you can hit me up with we can't know anything, Aveitt, and then I'd be like, all right, I don't want to talk about it, but I
They're
appreciate the
holographic
charitability.
discs.
Yeah, I just imagine like if we know that there's like cracks in the hollow Earth, if we got hit by an asteroid, it would just all be donezo. Like it has to have some sort of right. It would
What if
crack open like an eggshell.
Well, so the narrative that I've heard is that in Valhalla, in the Emerald City, there's a black sun that green energy comes from, known as Vril energy, and supposedly that's where the Northern Lights come from. I'm not going to claim that. I'm just saying I've
Yeah, that's
read
what they
stuff
said.
from ancient
Yeah,
culture, yeah, where they were like, that's where they came. So like they say that the center of the Earth, there's another sun that's like a black sun. So like it would be like the Earth's crust is like a magnetic force field that's held in place by gravity. So like something hitting it would just like strike it the same way it would strike a solid surface because there's like dense magnetism under it holding it up like a pillar.
that's that's interesting. I just would have to say that's not what celest or can I call planets celestial bodies? That's not what celestial bodies go through. They get hit really hard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't,
Yeah.
I
Like
don't know.
I don't
I
know, especially if you see how like huge the nukes we have. Have you seen that like those kind of photos of like a modern day nuke?
The last thing I've seen in terms of nuke is when they detonated the Tsar Bomba or whatever, which is old technology. So, are you talking about like when you say photo of a nuke? Are you saying like a computer generation of like what could occur if a nuke went off? Like, what do you mean by
No,
photos of nukes?
I mean they had like God, I just remember I saw at one point like what the blast radius of these modern bombs looks like. I guess the Tsar bomb is the most recent.
Well, the Tsar Bomb was the most recent that I've seen footage of it exploding. Um, I don't know if we've detonated a modern nuclear device. Supposedly, the technology that we have in existence, the payloads are like 10 to 20 times effective because especially because we're using uranium now instead of hydrogen, or plutonium rather. But I don't think we've ever detonated a plutonium device. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess on the global stage, something being as big as like Manhattan probably isn't a very good point, but I still feel like you hit something that hard. I don't know. I would just be too skeptical that the Earth wouldn't like cave in on itself because we already know it's cracked, right? We're not talking about like a full egg. We're talking about like a cracked egg. Um, if you scratch glass, and I know glass is a different material than rock, and it's like way like rock is a lot softer than glass, and what I mean by that is you can mold it more than glass on like the scale of hardness. But if you scratch glass, it's 30 it loses 33% of its strength. Um at least Gorilla Glass 3. Thank you,
Well,
phone sales.
I guess
And
I guess the way that I see it is like if I'm understanding it from the model that they're presenting, it would be like how like a baseball or a basketball or a soccer ball has like air in it that helps it retain its shape, but like there's an iron ball in the center that's generating the force or pressure of that air. So even if you puncture the object, the air remains within that field, it doesn't escape, and then the ball flattens. So
yeah,
you could damage it enough to puncture it, but it wouldn't uh what's the word? It wouldn't break down the structure.
I mean, they of course they would say, "Oh, it just doesn't break." LOL. Like, of course, Five Head. But I feel like I we know it's cracked. You know, we know that the surface of the Earth moves and it melts, and that
Well,
there's
no,
these cracks that like break open and destroy Haiti and stuff. You
I
know,
mean,
it's a
I'm not saying like if you damage it enough, I'm sure you could create an opening where you could from the outside of the crust see the center sun object or whatever. You'd have to create a lot of damage because like even if we thought it was hollow, like even if the Earth was cored out, it would still be several miles thick of you know different materials. Salt like metals, minerals, rocks. Like it would be all these different dense materials that are being affected by electromagnetism. So like even if you blew a hole in the side of it, like it's not. I wouldn't say it's impossible to do that, but like you wouldn't collapse it. You would just expose, the sun within. And then if you maybe destroyed the sun, then the energy holding it together would fall apart and then it would break down.
oh, like the sun would push it out and keep it together.
Yeah, like if you blew a hole exposing the sun and then shot another missile directly at the sun and it blew the sun up, then the whole structure would disintegrate or fall apart or whatever. That's the way I understand it, at least.
Sounds like magic to me, but
Yeah, I mean, who knows why the Vikings
I
thought that there was a green light emitting black sun in the center of the earth. I don't know.
I was gonna say we are appealing to Vikings, and my argument was that they thought that there's a giant snake that circles the whole planet. I don't think that they're the uh, dictators of reality, probably.
Which, to be fair, they could just be metaphorically describing the Milky Way. I mean, with modern light pollution, we do not see the night sky the way that the Vikings did.
That's
And
fair.
if they could have saw that whole strand of the thick little Milky Way part of the stars, they could have just metaphorically described it as a snake. But if anyone during that time period said it was a literal snake, they'd be laughed at or something. Maybe it's like that.
I think it probably is like that. I know that my best friend, he follows the Norse religion. He says that it's literal and that it's just like. But I think Valhalla is literal. I don't know. It's confusing. Valhalla sounds great.
I mean, every ancient culture has their own version of heaven, I think, and they just have different narratives on how to get there or what makes you worthy to be there or whatever. And I think, I guess I can't say where their intricate knowledge comes from. A lot of these ancient cultures depict talking to, you know, more advanced or like deitic beings or whatever, and that's where they got their knowledge from. So that's one
Yeah.
of the reasons why I thought like maybe there's this extreme scenario where we're just insects in comparison to intellect of other species that have existed before us, and this is kind of just like where they take their kids to observe like how the insects work in the little biome they built. And the biome is just so vast and beyond our understanding that we see it as like this incredible complex reality. But if it was just simply explained to us from their perspective, we could see like how minimal or simplistic it is. Because when
Right.
we talk, especially when we talk about the mathematic aspects, like if you were a really powerful or sentient species and the tools you had at your disposal were cosmic, why couldn't you create like your own little environment to have sentient experiments in?
Yeah, yeah. If you're going to, if you push this the next step, and you say that these powerful creatures created the Earth, then I'm not gonna. I don't know. I can't argue that, John. I can argue that the Earth is still round. I don't know if my alien overlords gave me the round Earth, but the Earth is round.
And you can fairly say that, but that's why I get confused. It's like if their experiments are successful based on you not understanding that you're participating in an experiment, then they would have to either participate in a way where they're influencing the culture away from the true narrative, um, where they could be presenting ideas like, "Oh yeah, heaven is on the inside of the earth, and this is the shape of the structure, and here's the mathematical methods of you know verifying the shape of the earth." And like you said, like yeah, there's a simple mathematic thing you can do, but it varies
Yeah, I was
percentage wise
gonna
with
say this
accuracy.
is like 10th grade math. I'm not appealing to like this giant calculus problem.
Right. So it's a general system, and at the same time, ancient cultures talk about math being presented to us by the same beings that we worshipped as gods and thought came from heaven. And so what if the tool that you have to discern the structure of your reality or determine the structure of your reality is also a construct of the person that constructed your reality. So it never actually reveals to you the true structure of your reality, but rather the narrative that they wish for you to conclude based on how the math works.
Well, I would thank these aliens for giving us the tool that got to make our modern lives so convenient and helpful. Using geometry, we're able to make video games, and I like video games a lot. So thank you, aliens. Without you, I couldn't uh, kill your kind when I play Halo.
You know what that sounds
Probably
you,
they
you know
destroy
what
me.
that sounds like to me? That
What?
sounds like I recognize us as human species as being limited based on our observational limitations. Like we have the visual spectrum we have the auditory spectrum we have, and then we have our limitations in the nervous system when it comes to feeling or touching or whatever. Um, we're a very limited species in our ability to observe the reality around us, and what you're describing is that there could be all these different dimensional understandings, but the only one that you've been able to observe is, say, like a two-dimensional or a three-dimensional understanding. And the person that gave you the ability or culturally indoctrinated your species with the ability to observe that dimension did it in a way that it limits you to only being able to observe that dimension or dimensions below it, so that you can never go beyond and observe the dimensions that the being presented to you, or where the being comes from. Like you couldn't progress as a species because you're using the methods of understanding your reality that are being given to you by a species that doesn't want you to progress, and you're not able to observe beyond that to the point where you're grateful for what you have and you're actually thanking the person inhibiting you to grow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, I understand your criticism. I would just respond that the nice thing I could say is that I'm a materialist, and that I think that every person has not not that every person has a part to play, but everybody does something that makes them happy. And I would wish you luck on your journey of challenging these extra dimensional beings that I'm not sure I would say exist. But anything that brings you joy in this world, I'm going to support.
Okay, I think we can conclude off that, unless you had any.
Well, I feel like hearing from you. I think you pretty much agree on that the sun is the center of the earth, right? That sounds like that's why
Center of
you
the
took it out of the
system,
debate
you
prompt,
mean?
right?
You're saying, do I agree that the sun is the center of the solar system?
Yeah. But I say the sun's the center.
Well,
We revolve around it. It doesn't revolve around us.
I guess while I can't definitively, comfortably say that I have proof that that's the truth, um, I certainly don't see anything pointing me to a different direction than that.
Okay. Well then, I think I think we're settled. I don't think I have anything else to say. Um, you got opening statements, so you got to do opening statements first. So I'll let you do closing statements first.
Yeah, I mean, my position is, I would say, pretty flimsy in the sense that it's only coming from the perspective that I can't uh, apply the same science and mathematics to the degree that the people in these agencies can, as well as I can recognize the potential malicious behavior when it comes to utilizing or harboring technology without expressing its actual function. And at the same time, we didn't really go too in depth as to why I've come to the conclusion that I've been lied to in various aspects of reality in terms of you know why we use what we use for currency, or why our society is structured the way it is, or any of those things. And because of that, I can recognize that in the same capacity I can be lied to in any other uh, scenario. So essentially, the only way that I could definitively say that the Earth is a solid sphere that orbits the sun, in this perfect manner in which it travels through space, as if I understood without a reasonable doubt how the physics of that functions, or I have personal hand experience in traveling in that environment and have made those observations. And while I can't say even in that capacity that what I'm observing is actually what I'm observing, I at least would have a better ground to accept the narrative than I do right now, whereas I've only walked around on the earth and observed it with my limited perception. That's it.
Okay, awesome. I'd like to say that I appreciate John having this conversation with me. I've been trying to have another conversation with John for a while. Being gone from the server from so long, I really wanted to like have, I don't know, a debate with a trustee to feel like I was like, I don't know, back in the limelight, you know? Aveitt's back kind of celebration. So first off, I wanted to thank John for having this discussion with me. I really appreciated it. I'd like to just kind of summarize some of the points that were made in this debate for the audience, just in case anybody missed certain parts. Um, my argument kind of had to deal with the core of saying that conspiracy theories only last for a certain length of time, and that we've seen this with other conspiracies in the past, and that the truth always tends to get out. I went ahead and talked about how ancient people knew that the earth was round and they knew the size of it. Um, and that this isn't a mystery, and went ahead and I proved the math. Uh, Ultimately, coming down to John doesn't know if his epistemology agrees with modern day math, and not even modern math, ancient math, 10th grade math. Um, and that's kind of the way the conversation went. And I appreciate everyone for listening. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was really fun. I appreciate it.